The First Amendment says that freedom of the press is essential to the American experience and to democracy. But the White House seems to think that, well, maybe the press has been a little too free lately. Just why is he cracking down on a late night talk show host? But is this a canary in the coal mine for things to get a lot worse for freedom of speech? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about this. So first off, if you're not an American or you haven't brushed up on your Constitution lately, you might recall the First Amendment. This is part of what we Americans call our Bill of Rights. This was added to the Constitution at the same time that it was written and was meant to spell out protections afforded to the average citizen from their government. You may recall that the American government and its founders rejected the monarchy, the absolute monarchy of Enlightenment era Great Britain. And so they said, we are never going to allow a monarch to abuse individuals and infringe on their rights in the ways that the king has. And so they created, most importantly, the First Amendment. And this is what it says. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging freedom of speech or of the press, or of the right of people to peaceably assemble and petition their government for a redress of grievances. Now, what does that mean in practical terms? Well, the answer is that it's actually viewed in America as being absolutely, unquestionably essential to our democracy. Because how can you have free and fair elections if certain ideas aren't allowed to be debated on the public stage, right? Imagine if we were able to censor ideas that were controversial, 60 years ago. Ideas like interracial marriage or ideas of like women having the right to vote would be undebatable. They would never be able to be discussed and therefore they would never be able to enter the discussion of the general public because as Americans, we have the right to free speech and freedom of the press, right? The right of media to engage in free speech. And then also the right to protest peaceably and even to sue the government. That is all protected. They are all viewed as being one and the same. Speech, the right to practice your religion. And what's notable about this is, again, it just says Congress shall make no law about prohibiting these things, right? And so I want you to keep that in mind when I cover this story, because as many of you know, late night talk show host Jimmy Kimmel, this is someone who's been hosting this late night show for over 2 decades in the United States, was unceremoniously fired. His show was suspended indefinitely. And that alone is not that exceptional a story. Shows are canceled all the time by major media outlets, right? They're obviously profit-making enterprises, just like the press in the founders' day, right? And sometimes some things make money, some things don't, and you can them. But when you peel back the layers, you realize that it probably wasn't the financials that caused Jimmy Kimmel to get canned. You see, on Monday night, he delivered an opening monologue. And famously, Jimmy Kimmel is somebody who is, a left of center, kind of centrist left comedian, right? He has some quips about the news of the day, right? And then he gets into his silly show. And the writers generally keep things pretty straight down the middle. So one of the things Jimmy Kimmel said, and this is the quote, he said, "We hit some new lows over the weekend, with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it." So you may notice that he did not say, it's good Charlie Kirk was murdered. That he didn't say. He didn't say Charlie Kirk had it coming. No, in fact, he described Charlie Kirk as a murder victim and offered no other commentary. But what he did say is that the Trump wing, the Republicans, are trying to use Charlie Kirk's murder as political fodder and trying to characterize the shooter as someone who differed from them in every way and was some kind of leftist. So you may note that that actually doesn't offer any kind of commentary about Charlie Kirk. It only calls out the political establishment for doing, frankly, what it's pretty apparent they're doing, which is trying to use it to rile up their base, to attack their enemies, and to achieve political ends. So given that level of pretty milquetoast opinion, right, pretty obvious opinion, the Trump administration absolutely lost their fucking mind, right? So the next day on a podcast, the Trump-appointed chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, this is an executive branch commission tasked with, well, managing and deconflicting communications. But this individual, Brennan Carr, told podcaster Benny Johnson, quote, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." He continued, quote, "These companies can find ways to change conduct and take action, frankly, on Kimmel, or there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead." Within a few hours, Nexstar, a company that operates most of ABC's affiliates, ABC is, of course, owned in turn by Disney, said that it would not broadcast Kimmel's show for the foreseeable future, and ABC immediately announced that it was terminating Kimmel's show. Now, of course, you could also argue that, well, maybe it was just inconvenient timing. But on Truth Social, Trump called Kimmel's removal from the air, quote, "great news for America." Tough to square that one, but in a post on X, Carr then thanked Nexstar for doing the right thing and saying, quote, "Local broadcasters have an obligation to serve the public interest. While this may be an unprecedented decision, it's important for broadcasters to push back on Disney programming that they determine falls short of community values." Now, this, you may notice, is the government dictating to ABC, to Disney, that if they don't engage in government mandated speech or cease engaging in certain protected speech, that the US government is going to punish them for it. And so Disney and ABC said, "Of course, sir. Of course, we may be the media, we may be the press, but we are not going to allow this person to offer opinions on our platform not because he doesn't make money, not because he's unpopular, not because the public is outraged, right? But because you, the government, have threatened us." And in the United States, this is what's known as a no-no. In fact, under Biden and even under Trump, you might recall during the Black Lives Matter protests, right? There was a lot of stuff that was kind of adjacent to this. It never got to the point where the government said, you must do X, right? Because obviously, at no point did any administration ever try to censor or silence Fox News or other right-wing outlets. Not once, right? And yet, now we're seeing this kind of thing rolled out here, right? And worth noting, by the way, as a result of the kind of, again, not a pretty inappropriate mob justice mentality around sort of making vaguely racially charged statements, that cost Democrats the election. Like the fact that Democrats sort of kind of tacitly endorsed institutions associated with them, like schools and major media outlets, kind of going along with some of this like mob justice around free speech, that the American public was like, absolutely not. Free speech is inviolable in spirit. That's the thing to also remember here, is that there's the legal free speech protections, which say the government can't tell you what to say. But there's also the principle of free speech that is unbelievably valued by Americans. It is so important to us to be able to take positions and have beliefs that almost no other country would tolerate, right? And that is, we believe that's a core part of the American success story. And so when a different administration, again, kind of sort of tacitly endorsed like some principles around speech policing, the American voter fucking kicked him to the curb. But this is on another level because, again, Joe Biden never tried to sue Fox News for any amount of money. They never took them to court over anything they said because they'd lose because of freedom of the press. And the fact that the administration, not only have they done that, not only are they trying to sue every one of their major outlets out of existence, but now they are finding individuals who offer opinions that the government doesn't care for. An unbelievably milquetoast opinion. One that, frankly, I think most of us agree with, that even most Republicans would agree that, yeah, they're trying to use the death of one of their commentators to achieve political ends, like, I don't know, silencing a critic. The fact that we all agree this is something that the government's doing is this is just on another level entirely, right? And this isn't to say Jimmy Kimmel's like takes are great or that we should never cancel a late night talk show host again. But you should understand what is happening here, because something similar happened, you might recall, to CBS late night host Stephen Colbert, who also was a Trump critic. But CBS said, no. Stephen Colbert's ratings were not great. We just canceled him because of that. The fact that there was a merger that had to be approved by the Federal Trade Commission, and that only after Colbert's firing was that merger approved, that was just a coincidence of timing. And when nobody said anything, the Trump administration said, well, why even keep up this farce? Why not just say it? Why not just say it on a podcast? I mean, imagine literally going on a podcast and being like, fuck this guy's free speech. The FCC is going to punish you for free speeching too hard. We're going to punish the press. And this is regarded by a lot of people as canary in the coal mine, right? And the thing, here's what really drives me up the wall, is that even the first Trump administration never came close to anything like this. Remember, all the BLM stuff, that was antithetical to the American right, to the Republican Party. And Trump never, he really never tried to silence any of them in this way. But now they've just dropped the mask. And the funny thing is, the sad thing is that you might recall the vice president himself went to Europe and said, hey guys, you need to commit more to free speech. And God bless the guy. It turned out he was totally right. Because JD Vance was like, listen, you Europeans often are using ugly Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation in order to hide, quote, good old entrenched interests and against alternative viewpoints, quote, that might express a different opinion or, God forbid, vote a different way or even worse, win an election. He denounced the UK government for its renegade free speech laws, right? Talking about anti-abortion protesters and Christian activists burning a Quran as protest movements, and anti-feminist comments in Germany, and people being sentenced to jail for offensive Facebook posts. And to his credit, I think he was kind of right, because as we see now, you see criticism of the Israeli government is really ramping up through the UK, and you're seeing large numbers of people being arrested for engaging in peaceful protest. And so the fact that they can go to another country, an ally, in fact, and give them a lecture on free speech, and then just a few months later, order comedians off the air is deeply troubling. And here's the problem with this sort of thing. Here's the real issue with this. And actually, before we talk about the deeper problems at work here, what I want to mention is that it's fairly obvious that I have a dynamic stance on this one, right? Because I am, whether I like it or not, engaging in protected speech, as you are, if you pop into the comments. And the problem, well, I'm not going to stop. That's the bottom line. I'm a suburban dad in my garage, but the reason I stay small, the reason I stay a suburban dad in my garage is that I can weather a lot of storms, right? I don't have a bunch of a huge salaried staff that works for me. I have one dude. And if the government wants to try to shadow ban me or nuke my content or coerce advertisers to pull away or continue to coerce sponsors to not touch me, that's fine. I don't care. But the reason I can do that is because you guys have my back. So if you want to support me and being able to do this independently, go to combatvetnews.com. Even if you don't sign up, you can see all my YouTube videos, including, for example, my most recent Charlie Kirk video that actually was demonetized pretty weirdly. But you can also become a member and support me and get access to exclusive, uncensored combat footage and other videos that YouTube won't let me show you. So again, the link is in the description. I really appreciate it if you can. So here's the troubling part of this, is that once the government sends a message a couple times that you need to make sure that the speech within your press, that you as press need to make sure that your speech is policed, eventually the government doesn't need to make censorship laws. We're seeing it already. You can see that without having to tell Governor Greg Abbott in Texas, Greg Abbott has said, hey, I saw a university student, again, engaging in protected speech, parodying the death of Charlie Kirk. Was it tasteless? For sure. Is tasteless speech protected? Yeah, especially political tasteless speech. That's real protected. Greg Abbott told the state university, hey, Texas State, this is a direct quote from the governor of Texas, this conduct is not acceptable in our schools. He wrote, quote, expel this student immediately. Mocking assassination must have consequences. Right? And the student was immediately expelled. Again, on behalf of the government. And this is, by the way, a Texas government that claims to be the defenders of free speech, that had actually a state law that said campuses are free speech zones. No campus could prohibit speech. Well, I guess that was just a performance. But here's the thing. There didn't have to be a call from the White House down to Texas to say do this. But it's not just the governors that are going to see these things, right? Because what happens is the same thing that happens in China. You see, you may notice that a lot of big major studio movies in the last 10 years or so have kind of become like dog shit. Their plots are thin, their characters undeveloped, and they don't really tackle any kind of a meaningful issue. And the reason is because those movies are written to be exported to China. And the Chinese have a robust censorship regime that reviews every single movie that enters China that's going to be put in theaters, and they simply give it a thumbs up or thumbs down. And they don't tell you why. So what's happened is that US studios have said, well, the Chinese don't tell us what we can and can't have in our movies directly. And they say, instead, we've gotten them rejected so many times that now we know how to censor ourselves. We make sure that our films never do anything pesky like question authority or, talk about the rights of minorities, right? Topics that are not acceptable in China. Even ideas like individual liberty or personal choice are sort of tiptoed around for the Chinese audience. But China doesn't have to pass a censorship law. They don't need a banned words list or an illegal topics list. The banned words and the illegal topics, they're done by the studios themselves. And so the danger is that once the government does this a few times, that other companies are going to be able to say, listen, you don't need to tell us that we need to silence your critics. You don't need to tell us that we need to make sure that we fawn over the administration's favorite people. You don't need to tell us those things. We're going to do it because we know by doing so, and by doing so proactively, you are going to reward us, right? And this administration has tools to reward that no administration has ever come close to doing. Sure, they can approve mergers, but look at what they've also done. Look, for example, at the TikTok deal, right? Let's see if we can pull it up here. The TikTok deal, for example, in which the administration has gotten China to agree to actually give TikTok or allow TikTok to be purchased by a select group of Trump fans. That's right. Larry Ellison, the richest man on planet Earth. Right? Andreessen Horowitz, Silver Lake Capital. These are serious fans of the president. So that's a pretty big reward, right? And you might recall, actually, that David Ellison, Larry Ellison's son, bought Trump ally, Israel ally, the Free Press, for like $200 million. And he's now taken over the helm of CBS and Paramount after that merger was approved. So you see how it pays to be a friend of the president. And again, the president says, listen, I didn't have to tell CBS what to do. They figured it out all on their own. And now they, or rather Larry Ellison, is reaping the rewards, as is Andreessen Horowitz, who always steps in and supports the administration's biggest and best businesses, including their crypto ventures. So the takeaway here is that this system of punishment and reward being doled out by the government in exchange for policing certain types of speech is reminiscent of another country, a country that we know President Trump admires quite a bit, and that is Russia. So as we just talked about the fact that you have students who go viral on social media for making comments, and again, the regional governors know to get those people out of school right away. You can see that a school security guard in St. Petersburg in Russia was sentenced to 5 years in prison for reposting an article about the Russian troops who committed a civilian massacre in Bucha. He was found guilty of disseminating fake news, guilty of misinformation, right, about the Russian army. And that Galushkin partially admitted guilt. He said he published a post on social media containing, quote, false information about the actions of the Russian armed forces, and a criminal case was referred, and he was sent to jail, right? You also, of course, have the editor, right? There's no freedom of the press in Russia. Here's a opposition outlet. Their editor-in-chief and channel producer have been transferred from pretrial detention to house arrest, according to a Moscow database, right? They have a lawyer, but the outcome is a foregone conclusion, right? Now they're in pretrial detention for corruption. Ah, interesting. Another easy to approve, applies to everybody. Just, corruption and bribery, right? And so you're seeing more and more of this kind of story. And of course, you have Alexei Navalny. Now, what's interesting is, again, Alexei Navalny, I think, is another great example of kind of the Putinist regime and this sort of thought process, which does not say that you must silence all opposition. Alexei Navalny was allowed to exist in Russia and state his case for years. In fact, in some ways, he was beneficial to Putin as sort of a galvanizing lightning rod to prevent, right? He was the opposition that was known to Putin. And it was he was controllable, and the people around him were trackable. It was actually quite effective until he got he became a little too problematic during the Ukraine invasion, when he was arrested on terrorism charges and sent to a Siberian penal colony. But what's also worth noting is that Navalny actually was a candidate for office several times. But every time, just before the elections, he would be arrested on trumped-up charges, and then the elections would pass, Putin and his allies would win, and then Navalny would be released, often without charge or with a mere slap on the wrist. So again, did he have free speech? No, of course he didn't. He was simply allowed to persist as an opposition, but only in a sort of controlled, normalized way. And only then he was permitted by the government to do so. This was not a right he had. This was something that Putin granted him so long as he promised to remain containable. And only when he became too much of a problem was he killed. And again, are we here? Are we at that point? Not yet, but we're starting to see it. You see, Trump ally Sinclair is actually, without being prompted by the administration, was actually told to demand, or not told, they just on their own told Jimmy Kimmel, we demand you make a direct apology to Charlie Kirk's family and, of course, donate to his organization. Which, as we point out, he didn't say anything about Charlie Kirk. That's not what he said at all. These remarks were not inappropriate and deeply insensitive, right? And this is even sort of more ghoulish, right? Because, again, the administration didn't need to tell Sinclair to do this, but Sinclair wants something from the administration. And so they've said, watch, look at us. Look at us. Not only are we kicking off one of your critics, Mr. Trump, but we are actually demanding from him financial contributions to your allies, that he pay fealty to the martyrs of your cause, which literally is almost compelled speech, sort of like making a false confession, right? The whole thing, to go back to J.D. Vance's speech, feels like something that belongs in the Soviet Union, not in the freest country in the world. If you guys want to help Ukraine's best units holding the line against Russian drones, well, we can do it. We're working with Ukraine Aid Ops to provide the units defending Kramatorsk with everything they need to keep the Russians at bay. This includes recon drones, generators, power packs, cables, antennas, anything these guys need. And they are the best of the best. The 93rd, the 25th, Azov, Special Operations, the 82nd, and Lyut. All units that I have met personally, including the 93rd, who actually graciously provided what I think is one of the sickest patches of any unit. This is the Corvus unit, one of the top reconnaissance units in the entire Ukrainian military. They really are excellent. They are so professional. I was in their headquarters, and they're next level. So if you want to donate, it's a 501c3, so it's US deductible, tax deductible, and an anonymous donor is matching dollar for dollar. So for every dollar you guys donate, he or she or they, I don't know who they are, will drop in another buck. So check the link in the description. Plus, a huge thank you to our Colonel tier members at Combat Vet News, guys like Sergei Zinchenko, Alan Knutson, Alfred Chesky, and all of our Lieutenant tier members. I couldn't do it without you guys. You guys make this whole thing possible. Thank you so much, and I'll see you